I believe this video is really interesting to include in this context, and I'm going to give a bit of background. We'll go over some things we've already covered and start setting the stage for things we're going to see next. Hang on, you'll get it soon. It might be a little confusing now, but you'll understand in a moment. What have we already seen? We've already looked at Sitchin's theory. We've already seen who Sitchin was, briefly. We've seen Sitchin's theory, right. We've already seen who he was. We've already seen how the theory was put together. I'm fully aware. I completely understand that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of us, came to the Anunnaki theory, to the saga, the story of the Anunnaki, all these topics, through Sitchin's theory. And not just through Sitchin's theory, but even a bit beyond that. It's also about addressing a certain uneasiness that many of us feel in two ways. The first is related to God, to deities, and to the creation of human beings. Our existential anxiety about knowing where we come from and knowing where we are going. And let me make a side note here. It won't be in this course, nor will it be at any other time in your life, anywhere you go, that someone will tell you with 100% certainty that we came from this place and that we're going to that place over there. In fact, if you ever happen to find places that claim to possess the absolute and undeniable truth, and emphatically state that we go from one specific point to another as the ultimate and unquestionable truth, then you should immediately run away from that particular place. Why do I say this? Because we live in a very broad society, with a wide range of different knowledge and concepts, with different sacred books, with different ideas. I think this plurality of thought is very positive in the world. But at the same time, we can't lock ourselves inside a box. We can't confine ourselves to just one book. I often say, and I say it a lot, I've said it in lectures and I say it very often on my channel, on YouTube, that we shouldn't, that I fear the man of only one book. Yeah, this phrase is attributed to either St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine. It's not really clear which one of them actually said it, and it was said back in the time when one of them was alive. One of the two said this phrase, you know, in the sense that we should be wary of someone who has read a single book a lot and has complete knowledge of that book. Nowadays, in our common understanding, we say that we fear the idea, in the sense I'm talking about, of someone who uses only one book as their reference point. Here, I'm going to use the one that most people take as their reference, which is the Holy Bible. The vast majority use this as their sole standard for measuring the truth. In fact, there's even a term, though I can't recall it right now, that some religions use for the infallibility of the Bible, right? As if the Bible were a sacred book written by God, completely free from errors, infallible, and we can't or shouldn't criticize it in any way. For me, Lucas, I would avoid, and I do avoid, these places, these environments, these people. I'm not saying you have to be that extreme, but I would steer clear of these environments that claim to be the sole holders of the absolute truth. That's because we need to open our minds to new possibilities, to new knowledge, and not take anything as the one and only exclusive truth, set in stone, like this is how it is and that's it. Otherwise, we'll end up stifling our human capacity for growth and development. Even the word development, right, in Spanish, desarrollo, it comes from the idea of unfolding, unwrapping, unrolling that old paper, you know, those rolled up scrolls that we used to keep in ancient libraries. So, yeah, if we just put a stone on top of it, we won't develop, and we need to develop. That's why I'm saying here that all this knowledge I've shared with you so far in this course, they are, and what I'm going to share with you next, in the following videos, they are foundational knowledge, fundamental, foundational, right, based even on historians, archaeologists, sociologists, and various books that I've read over the past years, 7, 8 years, since I started getting involved with the Anunnaki topic. And I'll tell you a bit about what happened to me when I discovered this subject. I read a lot and really grounded, built this foundational, fundamental knowledge. It's important for you to understand that this knowledge is meant to give you a foundation. It's for what we're going to see next, and in the upcoming videos, you'll see the actual myths, the very tablets in the museums. They're translated into English, and we'll use Google's automatic translation into Portuguese so you can take a look too, for those who aren't fluent in English.
Course originally recorded in Portuguese and dubbed using artificial intelligence. The course was recorded in 2022, when I was not yet a full-time YouTuber. The knowledge presented here is a treasure, as it brings the scientific foundations that qualified my research and are the resources I use to produce the videos on this channel. I know this dubbed voice is a bit monotonous. Although I speak English fluently, I chose to dub this content because it is older, and I wouldn't be able to re-record 10 videos with the same quality I managed to achieve back then.
But this is so you can go around saying that the Anunnaki isn't just some crazy idea. It really exists. It's in the tablets. It's in the myths. But it's not something you're going to base everything on. Like I said, set it in stone and say, that's it, period. Let's set that conversation aside, right over here to the side, for now. This video, this lesson we're going to do a lot of that. Let's just leave that talk off to the side. We're going to move on to another point in this lesson, and this point is called science. Let me tell you a little about who I am so you can understand why I talk so much about this on my channel and why I defend the idea of science so strongly. Currently, I am a librarian. I've been working in the academic field, inside a university, for over 12 years now. And as a librarian at an academic institution, it's been about half that time, around 6 years. I work with scientific information, with the dissemination and communication of scientific information, assisting professors, providing support, since I'm a librarian, with bibliographic references, helping professors select bibliographies, and often providing assistance, you know? I want to make it very clear that it's the professors who choose the course bibliographies, and I also handle cataloging and promoting the scientific knowledge and research output of the university where I work. Yeah, and not just that, too. Before studying library science, I studied physics for a while. Then I almost went crazy and quit physics. Yeah, I didn't actually finish the physics degree, but there I took general and experimental physics. I took calculus courses, I took introduction to quantum physics, and I took an astronomy course. So, I learned a lot about how scientific communication works in terms of producing papers, as people say, right? In the sense that, even in the experimental lab classes in physics, I couldn't, use terms like, oh, this book just fell from here like this, right? We have to say what the distance was, what the height was, how it was measured, what measuring equipment was used, why that data is accurate or why it isn't. All scientific production, with the evaluation and review of this data, peer review for scientific output, is very demanding, and I understand that this level of rigor is necessary. I myself, back in physics college, wrote some reports and had to rewrite them to learn how to produce this kind of science. Many people watching this course might actually be from the scientific field, engineers, physicists, chemists, among so many other professions, pharmacists, and of course, doctors too, right, who are familiar with this scientific rigor and know exactly what I'm talking about. But there are others who aren't, so I need to at least mention it here, even if briefly. In much of the world, you'll soon understand. You might already be getting a little suspicious about how these things are connected, but don't worry, they will connect and it'll all make sense, okay? In much of the world, universities fund scientific research, field research, and academic research. Science happens. In two ways research develops: the funding for research, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, right, as the saying goes. So, there always needs to be some money involved, right, because I can't keep doing science if I don't have food at home, so I need money. The one who's going to give me this money is the funder of my research. And who funds this research? In Brazil, we have federal funding agencies, right, public funding agencies, which over the past few years have lost many grants, a lot of this funding, and we also have the involvement of companies that fund scientific research. So, we have universities, public institutions, and companies interested in producing science, in research, in science as an outcome. When a certain piece of knowledge is acquired, researched, investigated, and we get a result from it, often there is some intention behind it. That's when we have a patent, a record of an intention. Let's use as an example, for instance. Example for instance sounds funny, right? I'll use as an example a cosmetic that's used on the skin. We're going to have the extraction of these plants, the research, the publication of these research results for later approval, of human trials. The trials begin, and so on. It's a whole rigorous series of steps before we can actually have our cosmetic there. And yes, we do have a company behind the people who are doing the research and seeking these results, because the company also needs to make a living. It also needs these results, all these discoveries. And we've already seen this in previous videos about the Library of Nineveh. The clay tablets are funded by academic institutions, academic companies. That's a good one. They're funded by universities, by academia, and also by companies, by people interested in finding these materials, and yes, in sharing these materials. This happened back in the 19th century. It was discovered, and now it's there, in the great museums of the world. And there are funds for this, right? There are researchers who investigate. There are several researchers, various studies, and still plenty of publications on the internet about this topic. And like I was saying before, that's how I found out about it too. And now I'm going to tell you, we're going to set aside all this science stuff for a bit, put it aside along with that other story we just saw, and I want to quickly share what happened to me, so I don't take up too much time in this video lesson, when I discovered the topic of the Anunnaki. When I discovered the topic of the Anunnaki, I'm naturally very skeptical. Not skeptical in the sense of not believing, not in the sense of discrediting things, but skeptical in the sense of someone who will only believe if there's a foundation and a basis for it, which is exactly what I'm offering you here in this course. So I went after it. I was completely blown away when I discovered the whole saga, the entire story of the Anunnaki. They came from the planet Nibiru. How can we say that? What planet is that? Can this planet support life? Or can it not support life? Is there any exoplanet with such an elliptical orbit so far from the sun? What kind of atmosphere would that be? Would it be possible? I studied astronomy. Could a gigantic body like that? Wouldn't its gravitational pull, when passing close to the sun, be so strong that it would pull the other planets along with it? What can we say about that? So I started asking all these questions here in a very skeptical way. Honestly, I needed a foundation. I needed something to support all of this. Well, Sitchin didn't publish his translations of the tablets. Sitchin defends himself by saying he used translations made by other specialists. In the making of The Lost Book of Enki, which contains the entire Anunnaki story in the 14 tablets that we're used to seeing all over the internet. In these 14 tablets he creates, and throughout this narration of the Anunnaki story, he uses different sources of information. He uses the Bible here, he draws on the Quran, and he makes use of other knowledge and other research. He could read the Bible itself, right, not just the translations we have, like in Portuguese or English, you know, the different versions. He could read the originals. So that's how he built his story. Now things are going to start making sense. Everything we've talked about earlier in this lesson. When Sitchin did his research and published it, for those who had access, it was a huge shock. We can, and I'm actually very critical of Sitchin's theory, of a lot of things he says, say that some things aren't true. But, to be fair, it's important to say that many of the things he talks about, we can't check in the original myths, because maybe they're not available. Yeah, maybe they're just not available. Why did we go through all that background about science and scientific publishing earlier? Because if there isn't a truly significant interest from people, and here, by people, I specifically mean financial resources, substantial funding, and addressing the entire crucial issue of sustainability within the world, what kind of meaningful and lasting results is it ultimately going to bring, right? For example, cosmetics are going to bring a lot of results. What kind of results would the widespread publication of Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, and later Chaldean tablets bring? What kind of results would that bring to the world? What kind of people, companies, scientists, what kind of people and companies would be funding this? What kind of scientists would be getting funded to publish tablets that confirm the Anunnaki theory? From Zihadi and Sitchin. I know I might be contradicting myself a bit here, but I need to bring up this counterpoint. And in this video lesson, we're going to have a lot of counterpoints for us to weigh. I'm not here to present a single truth. I'm not here to tell you, this is the truth, follow it, check it out, this is the way. But I am planting a lot of seeds of doubt in your mind, and that ties back to the first point we left over here in this corner. Our anxiety for an answer, our anxiety for an exist, for something that tells us where we come from and where we're going. Every human being has this anxiety. Inevitably, all of us need to know where we're going and where we come from. Some people, like me, are troubled by this question throughout their lives. They wake up, they sleep, and they spend the time in between waking and sleeping, and even while they're asleep, worried about this question. A certain anxiety that doesn't let you just get by naturally, without any worries, because I'm always wanting to know the reason for things. And just like me, there are many other people like this, anxious and searching for the truth. And on some level, all of us are anxious about this. There's a philosopher who talks about the existential question, Martin Heidegger, and he talks a lot about being thrown into the world, about the notion of Dacian, right, that we are thrown, hurled into the world, and when we get here, we don't really know where we are, what we're doing. This notion of being thrown into the world, it really fits with these kinds of questions. Knowing that a large number of people in the world, to some degree, greater or lesser, have this pretty deep question inside us, we start to ask ourselves who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. It's 1, it's 2, it's 5, it's 10, it's thousands of people asking these questions around the world. And that's not all. When we look at our existential angst, the first point we talked about, and multiply that by 1, 5, 10, thousands, billions of people with these questions, and then we look around at our old world, I have here, let me grab it to show you, a beautiful encyclopedia. Yeah, I'm the kind of guy who still owns an encyclopedia, and I actually bought it just a few years ago, before the pandemic, so it's pretty new. Encyclopedia of Antiquity. This might be reflecting a bit because of the lighting, so maybe you can't see it clearly. Here it says, Encyclopedia of Antiquity. Discover the fascinating secrets of the past. Here we have the little figurines from China, and we also have, this monument here is from the Mayans, right, here in South America and Easter Island. And here, look, I opened it right to this page. Must be because it's so well used, right? We do have something about Sumer here, the tombs of the kings of Ur, right? Anyway, there are things about Sumer here, and about the Assyrian Empire too. And there are all sorts of things. Here's ancient Greece, and so on. We have several, and that's what I want to highlight. We have several monuments. We have pyramids. We have the pyramids of Egypt. We have these pyramid structures here in South America, and we'll get to that in a moment. Then we'll touch a bit on the whole Ratanaba thing, the Amazon pyramids, and so on. But we'll get to that point in this lesson too. That's why I said it's interesting. We also have these pyramid structures in Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, the ziggurats, right? All the mysteries surrounding the ziggurats. And even today, with all the architectural and engineering knowledge we have, many of these things we still can't reproduce. Then there are the physicists, who will do all sorts of calculations about torque, about beams, right, about how many bricks you could put on a crane, so we could build the pyramid and all that, saying it's possible that it really was humans who did it, not aliens. Yeah, but then I want to raise a question, just as a layperson, because I didn't study physics, I'm not an engineer, and I'm not an architect. If we can build a pyramid exactly like the one in Egypt, why don't we? Why don't we see a pyramid like that around here? Look, I live on the Rio do Sul highway, here in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, and they just built a Christ the Redeemer statue that's bigger than the one in Rio de Janeiro. Why do we have a Christ the Redeemer here? Another one there. We have a Statue of Liberty, but no one has ever built a pyramid. A replica of a pyramid, so we could go inside a modern pyramid, with air conditioning even, maybe a movie theater inside the pyramid. Why isn't there, like, a pyramid at Disney for us to go inside? They've got all sorts of Star Wars stuff there, from the Star Wars universe, but not a single pyramid. It's something for us to think about. And here, I want to bring in a bit of that conspiratorial tone. Because when we look at the ancient world, we see all these constructions, right? I almost forgot, there's the whole Stonehenge controversy too, over in England, right? By the way, have you watched Outlander like I did? Interesting, isn't it? These questions. We also have the archaeological site of Göbekli Tepe, which also has a series, The Secrets of the Temple, on Netflix. Really good. I recommend you check it out after watching our course. Don't stop there. Or you can watch it alongside other people. There are many constructions in the ancient world, and we don't really have an answer as to why they were built. We don't have an answer for how these people acted this way. And there's something else. We're going to get into another aspect here, something called narrative, the construction of narratives. This is a really interesting point for us to discuss here. This video here already comes after we've built a historical, scientific, and archaeological foundation, and it will take us through the rest of what we're going to cover here, always grounded in science. But it's also meant to plant a seed of doubt in your mind, because when it comes to narratives, we can construct whatever narrative we want. Someone with, I wouldn't even say someone with the gift of gab, but even that old saying, that a lie told many times starts to become the truth if we manage to connect the dots, stitch everything together nicely, one little book after another, and tell a whole story, we end up building a narrative. We start to work on that first aspect of existential angst. And that's how religions work, in my view. Religions build a narrative based, yes, on myths that support and make it possible for rituals to exist, and they become sanctified over time, literally sacred, right, from sacro, meaning sacred or divine, they become sanctified over time, and they answer. It's a narrative that answers our existential questions, that tells us where we came from and where we're going with certainty. They create a path that we follow, and we come from existential anguish, we go through science, and we arrive at the narrative, and it answers everything for us. And not only does it answer everything for us, but it also gives us comfort. That initial discomfort from existential anguish, from wanting to know where we come from, where we're going, from being in the world, is covered up, is filled by the comfort that the narrative offers us. The absence of this narrative makes us feel discomfort. And here's an interesting point. Discomfort leads us to seek out narratives. And instead of us tracing this middle path down here, because we're going to have the second pillar here that I presented to you, which is science. Let's take a moment here. Science, it also arises from the human need for an explanation. And science, it's tough. It's rigid, it's exact, it has standards, it has what I explained to you that I learned in physics, making a report, redoing a report, until we can explain exactly which equipment measured that, what the distance is, everything just right, to allow for reproducibility. In other words, so that other people around the world can reproduce this experiment and also verify the truthfulness of this experiment. These standards here, even though we can, yes, criticize these standards, they are important so that we can sustain our current world. There is a term called evidence-based medicine, which is very common, right, in the medical field, in the health field, which is the evidence that a medication that a group of people was exposed to made a difference compared to the group that received a placebo, right, and we can evaluate over time how it went. That's how vaccines, medications, and so on were developed. It's evidence-based medicine. Sooner or later, someone will disprove this evidence here, right? It's no longer a medication. We found out it's just a compound, so now we'll use that compound, and so on. It's important for us to know that this standard here is backed by money, it's backed by interests, it's backed by greed. And when we break out from here, from this point of doubt and anguish, towards the narrative, we pass through this central point here, we pass through this point that brings these patterns. And these patterns, when we talk about the religious sphere, are also upheld by people who want to maintain their institutions, just like we see with the Catholic Church, centuries and centuries and centuries, for millennia maintaining its institution. So I think that for us to be able to handle all this information I'm sharing here, we have to move between these different points, without clinging to any of them as an absolute truth. We have to move around understanding that science does, in fact, have its own interests. We have to move around understanding that the construction of a narrative also serves an interest, and that our own existential anxiety as human beings, as a society, also serves a very specific interest, which is the search for answers. That's what led to the development of science, religion, theology, human relationships, the search for comfort, our own ambition. After all, a tiger and a lion in the jungle aren't looking for any of that. They just want to survive. And we, as human beings, we don't just want to survive, right? Like that song by Titus says, for those who are a bit older and know it, right? We don't just want that, we want more than that. We want to go further. We want to take a course. We want to see what one person says. We want to see what the other says. When we get to this third aspect of narratives, it's important. I need to bring this up here. Some people will say, oh, but why is he going to bring up this topic? This is nonsense. Others will say, I'm glad he brought up this topic. Yeah, in this sense, there's not much to do. I need to talk about this topic, which is Ratanaba, which is the civilization of the Morelos. I'll give a quick background. I also don't know this topic that well, just to be clear, and I need to quickly explain for those who also aren't familiar with it, or have no knowledge at all, so they can quickly understand what we're talking about. These days, the internet is buzzing with new information, right? I've even had people who have seen my channel, ever since I created my YouTube channel, because back when I did the podcast I didn't have this kind of conversation. People saying that the Sumerian civilization wasn't the first civilization in the world, it was the Morelos civilization, which came before the Sumerians. There are also people saying that it wasn't the city between the Tigris and Euphrates, the cradle of civilization, but actually here in Brazil, in the Amazon, in a city called Ratanaba. Who's behind and who's spreading this information? The ones spreading this information are the Tequila Group. The Tequila Group belongs to a businessman named Eurinder Fernandez de Oliveira. I remember him from when I was a teenager, on some TV shows known as UFO. He founded a city called Ziggurats, which makes sense with everything we're talking about here. There's an observatory, an astronomical observatory. There are several researchers. There are all sorts of things. As far as I know, Eurinder Fernandez de Oliveira, here in the third part, we're in the narrative section. He is a critic of these scientific standards here, just like many of us might be. He criticizes this as a foundation for the world. That's because on his website, we find a lot of things talking about the requirement for a diploma. Eurinder Fernandez de Oliveira, also responsible for a documentary that's been floating around the internet with thousands and thousands of views, which is about the flat earth. There's another name for flat earth in it, which slips my mind right now, but anyway, it's about the flat earth, okay. I need to clarify this point here. As a librarian, as someone who needs support and a solid foundation for ideas, otherwise I wouldn't even be here giving this course, I need to make use of this middle ground here, of science. I'm going to make a parenthesis here to explain why, because we need these standards. In some way, we need not someone to tell us how to proceed and support ourselves, but my personal, academic, student, and curious journey as someone with an existential anxiety in search of the truth requires a foundation, requires standards that can, stand up to narratives and can either confirm or not, can challenge these narratives, can shed light on the shadow of a narrative or on the very light that the narrative has, and be able to examine that narrative here. And so I need to say the following. There must be, yes, pyramids in the Amazon. Maybe there are. There are many legends that come from the indigenous people. There are many legends from the peoples who came before, and there are pyramids here in South America itself. There are monuments, just as there are monuments over in the Middle East, in Egypt, between the Tigris and Euphrates. There are also monuments here in South America. So yes, it's possible that there was a civilization even older than the Sumerians. Maybe it could be the Atlanteans, or together with the Atlanteans, or even before the Atlanteans, if Atlantis really existed. It's definitely possible that such a civilization existed. Do we have any proof of this civilization? No, we don't have any. The group that's making this claim, and this isn't anything personal against the group, but I have to mention it, the group that's making these statements, right? The group that's saying Ratanaba is the first city, the cradle of civilization, the very first city that ever existed on the entire planet Earth. Is there any proof of that? No. So far, there is no proof at all. Is there any scientific publication that has been peer-reviewed? There isn't either. Are there other people who have investigated this? Yes, there are. The people who have investigated this, at other times, have published scientific papers saying that yes, there was a civilization, but it is very recent in history and dates back to, now I can't remember the exact year, but I think it's around 1200 AD, and there was a civilization there that was close to the indigenous people. So, what has been found so far does belong to a civilization, but it's not the mural civilization, it's not the city of Ratanaba, as people are saying. We could even call it Ratanaba, but it's not a city as it's being described. That's according to these standards here. If you want to go along with the narrative and say that this narrative is okay, that it's sustainable, maybe it even is. And now, we're going to wrap up our lesson here. But before we finish this lesson, let me wrap up this part. Yeah, since we don't have any proof at all about Ratanaba, about the murals, and we only have one group funding researchers, just like there are other groups funding other researchers, and just like there were groups funding the archaeological research that led to the Sumerian tablets, right, just to make that comparison, since we have this group here making these claims and we have no evidence or proof, from my point of view, we can dismiss this story here. We don't have any history books, we don't have any encyclopedias, we don't have any scientific articles, we don't have any kind of publication at all. All we have are a few people out there in various YouTube videos taking over the internet, with some articles in newspapers and things saying that the whole world, right, the entire planet Earth developed from Ratanaba, from the Amazon, more specifically the Brazilian Amazon, which this group claims, saying there would be many riches that could transform the whole world, and so on. From our point of view here in the course, we're going to disregard all that information because it has no basis, no foundation, nothing at all. Let's say if we wanted to make a course about this, about Ratanaba, I would have to get my information from YouTube videos about what these people have done on various channels. There's no way for us to base ourselves, like I do here, with Samuel McCran, Andrew Allen Black, and other books I've read. There are no tablets like the ones from Sumer that we can read in museums. There's nothing. So there's no way for us to have a foundation to say anything about Ratanaba. Wrapping up this point here, bringing some existential angst to science, is the issue of narratives. We need to look at that point I said I was going to bring up, the conspiratorial angle. The point that in everything, there are always interests involved. The point that everyone wants to show, prove, and experience their own truth, and even impose their own truth on others, just like religious institutions do, like the Europeans did when they came here to convert the indigenous people who already had their own spirituality, and they came here to stake, right, to plant their cross, like they did on our land, and to force, to say that Christ is salvation. That the indigenous people needed that salvation, which until then they hadn't even heard of. They were the divine emissaries who brought salvation to our indigenous people. This whole issue here, this whole war of narratives and everything else, and everything we've laid out and discussed here, is for those who know that what is tangible, what is measurable, Medivel sounds awful, sorry. For everything that is measurable, everything that is tangible, everything that is perceptible in our world, that's not the only thing that exists. It's not just materialism. And there's a mystical aspect that surrounds all of this. There is something that isn't, that fits more with our sense of anguish, but it's neither in the narrative nor in science, neither in the hard measurable exactness of calculations nor in the stories built by human beings. It finds more shelter in our anguish for an answer. It breaks through tangible matter, physical matter, and finds us in our most spiritual sense, in the part of us that knows things aren't answered by cold, hard data, in the part of us that knows that no matter how much science, traditional science, says that, for example, in the ziggurats, contact happened with the city's god, but we can't say whether that contact was physical or spiritual. There's a mystical aspect here that resonates deeply within me, that resonates deeply within you. There's all this uncertainty about who built these monuments. There's something really interesting I want to share with you. It's even hard to put into words. Göbekli Tepe, for example, which does predate Sumerian civilization, and we don't have much information about it. For those who don't know, it's an archaeological site that was discovered in Turkey, located near the region where the Sumerian tablets were found, so close by, it's nearby. We don't have much information about it. There are images of animals there, and from what we understand, it's a monument dedicated to the gods. The great human civilizations, the earliest ones aren't even really civilizations. The first human groups and communities that gathered always spoke of divinities, of deities, of contact with the divine, of breaking through matter, of going beyond the coarse material world. And we also long for that. We also seek that. I don't think it's wrong for you to say that the Anunnaki are aliens who came from Nibiru and all that story we know. Even though science and archaeology will show that this term, Nibiru, doesn't actually exist. Actually, it does exist, but it doesn't mean planet, okay? Here we find our existential anguish, our search for answers. And even though you're taking this course, and yes, I'm going to show you some foundations that are unbelievable, truly impressive, so that we can read certain things, make them tangible, feel these myths as if they were in the palm of our hands, I can't say that you should reduce everything to academicism or scientism. To turn science into a rigid narrative that tells us what is what, stops us, holds us back, and says, this is it, period. Let science become a tool for exploration as we search for these kinds of answers. Let's not take this as an absolute truth either, okay? But science shouldn't be our stopping point for a single, exclusive, definitive answer that shuts down our search for new knowledge. If we want to evolve as human beings, we'll need to look at these 3 points: science, narratives, and our existential angst, seeking a balance between them, but also exploring these possibilities through courses, videos, books, lectures, podcasts, gatherings, and even bar conversations with friends or at home, in our meditations, in our thoughts. And as I say, taking a deep breath, feeling ourselves as beings who are part of the universe, not just as physical matter, but breaking through to the more mystical aspect that contemplates space and the infinite universe in search of an answer. That wraps up our 4th lesson, and I'll see you here in lesson number 5. I hope this great journey has been exciting and interesting for you, and that it has helped me understand, amidst so many things that are sometimes hard for us to express what's inside, and to bring to you, who are watching through the coldness of science, through the screen, whether it's your phone, your TV, your computer, or your laptop, a response to something so difficult, making use of the medium of science, creating a narrative and bringing an answer to this existential angst of ours. That speaks deep down to what we are with who we feel we are. I'll see you in our next class.